Hello. Evaluation to IEP. How due process affects you. Evaluation. This process finds children's needs by assessing their strengths and their weaknesses. Before you can initially evaluate a child, you must have prior written notice to ensure the tests are given by people who are trained in the assessment. Once a child is identified as a candidate for special education, a written referral for assessment is created. This can be created by a parent, teacher, or other service provider. An assessment plan needs to be proposed within 15 days. This plan lays out what will be tested and why for the parent or guardian. If they agree with the plan, they can give consent and the assessment begin. If they do not give consent, the process ends here. When assessments are concluded, an IEP meeting must be held within 60 days of the signing of the assessment plan. At this meeting, the team decides if the youth is eligible for special education. If they are not, the process ends here. If the child qualifies, however, the IEP process begins. IEPs. There are 8 main components of an IEP. IEPs are created to establish measurable annual goals for the student, as well as to state the special education and related services and supplementary aids that the school will provide. Here are the 8 components of an IEP. Component 1, present levels of performance. This section of the IEP summarizes a student's current level of achievement in academic behavioral areas formed after an evaluation of a student. Summaries include current, specific, measurable, and objective baseline information for each area that is affected by the disability of the student. The present levels of performance component of an IEP answers questions like, how is the child currently doing in school? How does the disability affect his or her performance in class? Part 2, annual goals. This is what a student can reasonably be expected to accomplish within a 12-month period with the provision of special education services. These goals can include who, behavior, criterion, condition, time frame. The goals should be meaningful, measurable, and able to be monitored. They also should be useful in making decisions. Often benchmarks are used. These are major milestones which specify skill or performance levels at which the student needs to accomplish to reach their annual goal. For example, by October, when given a list of 20 unfamiliar words that contain short vowel sounds, David will decode them with 75% accuracy on each of 5 trials. By December, when given a list of 20 unfamiliar words that contain short vowel sounds, David will be able to decode them with 90% accuracy in each of 5 trials. Another part of an annual goal can be a short-term objective. This is measurable, immediate steps that are between a student's present level of performance and the annual goals established for that student. The third part of an IEP is measuring and reporting progress. The IEP must contain an explanation of how progress towards goals and objectives will be measured and describe how that information will be reported to parents. The fourth part is the description of special education services. This area contains a statement of the special education services, the related services, and the supplementary aids or services that are provided to the student. Each statement describing services must advance appropriately towards attaining annual goals. In other words, the services provided must all help the student get to their annual goal in the IEP. The next part of an IEP is the Statement of Participation in a Regular Education Program, otherwise known as the LRE, or Least Restrictive Environment. This is important because it ensures that children are educated in the least restrictive environment to the greatest extent that's appropriate. If an IEP team has to consider how a child will do if they participate in a general education setting, if that will be the best place for that child to learn, or if they need to be placed in a special education setting. The IEP must specify the amount of time a child will participate in regular education program and explain why they have that amount of time. The IEP must also include an explanation of the extent, if any, to which the child will not be in a general education setting or not be in regular classes. The sixth part of an IEP is the program and testing modifications. IDEA requires that students with disabilities take part in state or district-wide assessments. The IEP team must decide if the student needs accommodations in testing or another type of assessment entirely. This area describes the types of testing, adaptations, and modifications that will be used with the student and why they're necessary. Some examples of accommodations and modifications in testing are having an aide in the classroom or getting special equipment or teaching materials. They can also include testing in a small group, being read aloud to, or having visuals provided to help them with learning. The seventh part of an IEP is a statement of length of and duration of services. This is pretty self-explanatory. The IEP must include a projected beginning and ending date of services, the frequency that those services are going to occur in, and whether they will be where they will be delivered and how long they were provided. For example, David will see a social worker for 30 minutes on a weekly basis. Or David will have physical therapy twice a month for 40 minutes. Part 8, the final part of the IEP, is the statement of transition. Now this part doesn't apply to every single student. This only applies to those who are going into 9th grade or above 14 years of age. It has to happen by the time they're 16 years of age. In this section, they have measurable goals for the student's anticipated post-secondary program and a description of the services needed for the child to reach those goals. Transition goals and services focus on instruction and support services needed to help the child move from school environment and into a job, to advocate for themselves in college or a vocational program or other program designed to promote independent living. Transition services are based on the individual child's needs, taking into account the child's strengths, preferences, and interests. They include instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, and, if appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills and provision of functional vocational evaluation. Congratulations. After that transition has been written, the IEP is finished. And you're ready to move on to the next part. Written parental consent. Once all 8 components are done, the dates and language have been reviewed, it is time to show this IEP to parents and guardians. You have 14 days either to decline the IEP or to give consent before the IEP takes effect. Implementation of the IEP. Once the 14 days have passed or there is a signed consent form, the IEP is in place. The school is now responsible for the services and accommodations written in the IEP. Unless the team finds that the IEP needs to be changed, this document will stay in place for 1 year until the next annual meeting. Now, there are times when you need to have meetings more than once a year. You might even have a few meetings in a year. If a student is not able to do well in a certain goal area, if new challenges occur or other situations happen in school where this child is not being successful, the teachers or the parents can decide that they want to have an IEP meeting to try and figure things out. For example, if a student needs to be put on a special transportation, that could be an additional IEP meeting where you would make changes. The evaluation process happens every 3 years, so you won't have to go through all those tests and assessments on an annual basis, unless there's a new need that arises or a concern that a parent or a teacher has, in which case special assessments can be provided to try and figure out how to help the child best. All this wonderful information was brought to you in part by the Special Education Law section of Minnesota Department of Education, and from some personal interviews with Allison Dillon, a special education coordinator for the Cloquet School District, and Melissa Goldsworthy, my wonderful mentor.